Let's define the word trauma. Trauma is any event that is overwhelming, overstimulating, or too much for a person to cope with. This can be an event such as sexual abuse, witnessing domestic abuse in the home, or even being removed from your home by DCS. There are several types of trauma. The main types are sexual abuse, disaster, physical abuse, and relational developmental trauma. Let's back up. What is relational developmental trauma? Relational developmental trauma is emotional neglect and failure to connect with a caregiver. This is when a caregiver is inconsistent in their care or attention, and the child does not feel loved or safe in their relationship. This can make it difficult for a child to enter a new home and build new relationships. Whether a child has experienced repeated or a single event, it will change their behavior and responses to the world. Now, take a second to think of a child that is having difficulties in your life. We will refer back to this child and ask more questions. We will also end the presentation with strategies to hopefully help you and this child.
During the first 3 years of life, the brain goes through rapid development. What children experience during these years directly influences the way that their brain takes in information and forms new connections. When a stressful situation occurs, the body has a fight or flight response to that stress. During the fight or flight response, the body releases stress hormones. These hormones can cause heart rate and blood pressure to increase, muscles to tense up, and the pupils to dilate. You may start to sweat or get the chills and start to breathe faster. However, with the support of an adult, children can learn to cope with these challenges and their body returns to its resting state. When a child is exposed to strong, frequent, or long-lasting trauma, these are called adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. ACEs are more difficult for a child to cope with, which can result in toxic stress. This is where stress hormones continue to be released for a longer period of time and start to take a toll on the body. When the body is constantly in a state of fight or flight, hormones begin to disrupt the development of new connections in the brain. This can cause parts of the brain to develop and respond differently. The image on the left was taken from a child who had not experienced any traumatic events. The image on the right shows a child who was taken away from their parents at birth and faced extreme neglect. The circled parts of the brain on the right are less developed and less active in the child who has experienced trauma. Trauma doesn't just change the way a child thinks or acts, it physically changes the way that their brain is shaped.
After learning about the different types of trauma one can experience, we now know that trauma isn't always easily recognizable. Since trauma can be more than just physical and not outwardly present itself, you'll want to take notice of behaviors that could be signs a child has experienced some form of trauma. Behaviors such as irritability or fussiness, frequent tantrums, refusal to follow rules, or talking back to authority can all be signs that some form of trauma may have occurred. For children who have experienced trauma, their development tends to lag behind their age and calendar years. It may be normal for a child to exhibit behaviors that are more common for a different age group than their own. Trauma can affect children differently based on the way they choose to cope with what they have experienced. The various effects of trauma on children include chronic illness and the inability to control physical responses to stress, aggressive behaviors, difficulty with thinking, learning, and concentrating, and the inability to regulate their emotions. These signs don't necessarily indicate that a child has experienced trauma, but if the symptoms are longer lasting and more severe than what is typical for their age, or if it impedes with their ability to succeed in school or at home, it's necessary to seek professional help. It is also important to identify the potential triggers in the child's environment in order to avoid stressful situations or adverse behaviors. Take note of what distracts the child, what makes them anxious, or situations that may result in tantrums or outbursts. When working with children who have experienced trauma, it is important to understand that behavior is communication. When behaviors arise throughout the day, try to analyze the behavior to understand what the child is trying to communicate. Trauma-informed care is not something that is one size fits all. It requires an individualized approach that is unique to each child's needs. In order to implement trauma-informed care in the home, it is not necessary to know exactly what type of trauma the child has experienced. What is important is to be able to recognize the signs and symptoms of trauma, to create a safe and nurturing environment for the child, teach skills to help them regulate their emotions in healthy ways, and to serve as a stable and reliable adult in their life.
Let's bring back the child that you thought of at the beginning of this presentation. Think of the negative situations that they have been in and what their life has been like up to this point. How have these events affected their behavior and how they communicate their needs? Take a second to write down some new ways to view this child's behavior. Instead of he or she is a bad child, think what does he or she need right now?
What is resiliency? Resiliency is the ability to cope with a crisis or traumatic event and return to pre-crisis status quickly. When life pushes someone down, if they are resilient, they are able to get back up. How can someone build resilience? Resiliency requires supportive relationships and opportunities for skill building. It doesn't matter what the negative experience was. What's important is having the support of at least one stable and committed relationship with a parent, caregiver, or other adult, such as a teacher or a coach. All it takes is having the consistent support of one adult throughout positive and negative experiences to allow a child to build resilience. It is important to learn to cope with manageable threats to our physical and social well-being. Not all stress is bad or harmful. There are countless opportunities in every child's life to experience manageable stress. With the help of that one supportive adult, this positive stress can be beneficial. This picture is of a scale of negative and positive outcomes and experiences. Take the time to draw this picture to reflect your positive and negative life experiences. Is your scale on the positive or negative side? Was there an adult who helped you get through your negative experiences? Think about that child and how many negative and positive experiences they may have and how you can be that positive adult. By now, I'm sure you're wondering, how can I help? How can I make a difference? Be emotionally and physically available. Some children who have experienced trauma may act in ways that keep adults at a distance, whether they mean to or not. For example, yelling, crying, hitting, not following directions, and not participating. It's important to follow the child's lead on what they may need. Younger children may want extra hugs or cuddling. For older youth, this may look like spending time together as a family, a fist bump, or how was your day? Is there anything that we can talk about? Follow their lead. Don't take behavior personally. Allow the child to feel his or her feelings without judgment. Some children may need help identifying their feelings. Provide alternative ways to identify feelings, such as visuals. Once a child is able to identify their feelings, help them find ways to cope with their different emotions that are socially acceptable and do not harm themselves or others, such as deep breathing, listening to music, and others. Be consistent and predictable. Develop a regular routine for mornings, meals, playtime, and bedtime. Prepare your child in advance for changes or new experiences. Having a visual calendar with events happening throughout the week can help prepare the child for what is to come. Allow for some control. Reasonable age-appropriate choices encourage a child or youth's sense of having control of his or her own life. Some examples of choices can be, what do you want to wear? What would you like to eat? And what would you like to play? Giving options such as grilled cheese or spaghetti may work better than open-ended choices such as, what do you want to eat? Be patient. Everyone heals differently from trauma. Respect the child's course of recovery. Trust doesn't happen overnight. Now think back to that same child that you had previously. Write down some strategies that you can use to help them become resilient. How can you make a difference? How can you be that one person to have a positive impact on their lives? Thank you for all that you do in foster care.